Hello! Check it out, natural light today. So last video we went flying with the Chimera 7 with the WalkSnail system in. Got cut a little bit short, unfortunately. There's some errors in Betaflight 440 or it's not happy with this board essentially. And we used our goggles to look at that, had a great picture until it sort of all went a bit wrong. And when we rendered that out, we used the default font, and I thought that looked pretty good. But on this video, I want to cover using custom fonts because you can get some really nice ones. So in my last video, I talked about this download link here, which was the font update procedure. And again, you did really need these if you wanted to use these fonts in the tool for putting the OSD information over the DVR. And there's this other thing here called the font update called INI. And if you were to download this and have a look at that, it would look like this. And from just looking at this, you can probably work out what you need to do to put multiple fonts on there. But this, if you put it in there, would just put the fonts that are already in the goggles as custom fonts, so we don't want to do this. What there are is some people making really good looking fonts, and the one that keeps coming up when I have a quick search for it is this guy Sneaky FPV, who has done a bunch of HD fonts for all the goggles. So the WTFOS, if you've got that running on DJI, the WalkSnail or HD0. And he's got different fonts for ArduPilot, Betaflight and iNav. So if we take a look in iNav, and there is an important just read thing here as well about looking at a version of the firmware and how it won't work if it's called BTFL. I've gone past that firmware version. I'm not sure if it's still relevant to me. I guess, I'll find out. Anyway, if you go ahead and download this, first off, I thought it was all the same font but with different versions, but Nexus is one font, and if you look in the version 3 folder, there's a bunch of other fonts. Nexus is possibly the most interesting and seems to be the one everybody's seeming to use. And if you download and open that file, this is what you get. You get two files. The 24 is the size of the font that's used in 720p, and the 36 is used in 1080. And if we open up this font update, you can see that it just gives us this one font, and it's got the two file names there. And basically all we have to do is take this font.ini and the two ping files and put them in the SD card of the goggles. It only goes in the goggles, of course, because don't forget there's nothing on the VTX. The OSD is completely made by the goggles looking at the data coming back, and it puts that on the screen for you. So we should be able to put this straight in the goggles and see what it's like. So why not do that? So I'm going to take these 3 files, copy them over to my WalkSnail memory card, and I've just updated it with the latest firmware. And now that's done, I'm going to eject that, stick him in the goggles and see what happens. To update the fonts, you'll need to be getting some sort of picture through from the VTX, else you don't get many of these options. They're all grayed out. But all you need to do is go to the display and go to font update, and that will read that font update.ini file and process it. So once you say yes and update the fonts, you will notice it switches over to a custom OSD, and our custom font there is called BTFL Nexus, which is what we're after. So if we now come out of the menu, you can see our upgraded font, except it's not in the right position. And this is quite common. All the custom fonts seem to be offset to the right and down a bit. So obviously what you need to then do is go back into display and go to OSD position and move that font around. I'm just going to speed this up slightly, but yeah, essentially you use a little joystick, you put the font where you want it, and what you're left with is the font just the way you wanted it and where exactly you liked it. Interestingly, I noticed, because I was worried about moving this font, what's going to happen to my original font, but if you switch out of the custom fonts, your normal font is absolutely in the right place. So each custom font has its own OSD position as well. There's nothing to worry about moving one thing and affecting the others. Well, Nexus is one of the fonts, and I would say perhaps the main one, but there are also some more. There's Blinder, Sphere and Confrax, and if you want to know what these look like, quite a good way I thought of doing things is to use the WalkSnail OSD tool. I talked about in the last video for how you make your OSD appear on your recording, and you can kind of use this as a little test bed, because right now we've got that original BF24, that was what's essentially on the goggles. But if I was to go ahead having downloaded these fonts, and then I was to open, for example, the Sneaky Nexus, which I just looked at, you see you get a little preview of what it looks like. And if you start the render, you can render out your existing footage in what it looks like. So I did that with all the different fonts I could find. So here's the original inbuilt Betaflight font on the goggles, which you would have seen me fly with last time. Here's Nexus, which we just looked at updating the goggles, which is quite a nice one, quite popular. This one's called Blinder. Not as exciting for me, but down to personal choice. This is Contrax, a little bit more jazzy, I guess. And lastly, we have Sphere, which is quite futuristic looking. So that all looks good, and I thought, well, why don't I just put all the fonts there, and then I have an option to use them. The only problem I found with that is that each of these fonts, the Blinder, the Contrax, use the same file name. So what I figure I have to do is update, because my font update INI would be pointing to the same files in every case, so we have to change that. So what I did is I created a directory, and then I renamed the fonts with more sensible names, and then I created a font update.ini with the relevant names. This is all just pasted in from the font update.ini from each one, and then I've just altered it to change everything. So what I'm going to try and do is pop that on the memory card for starters, then let's see if we can update again, and then see if we can switch between the various fonts. So first thing I did was put the SD card back in, went to update the fonts and hit OK. But I did notice I was missing one of the fonts that I was expecting, and some of you guys will be saying, well, duh, we saw your config file and we could see the typos from here. And yeah, I made some typos. Be careful of that, else it won't see everything. And I went in and just corrected all the positions of the free fonts I did have. Although my advice would be, if you've got an error in your file, don't bother rearranging everything, because as soon as you do the font update, all those positions are lost once again. But the weird thing is, when I went back, corrected it, double checked it, all was okay, and went to update it, I would get a font update failed. And I began to suspect that it didn't like either the fact I was updating the file on my Mac, it kept saying it was corrupted when I got it back on my computer, or it only supports free fonts. So when I took one of the fonts out that I knew was working, which was the Blinder font, and updated it again, then everything was absolutely fine. So I had the three favourite fonts, but I didn't have 4 fonts, and I'm not quite sure why that is. I will be asking WalkSnail about it. But just to compare once again, this is the default font you get with the goggles, and I've had to go round and redo the positions of the OSD once again. Here's the Nexus font, this is Contrax, and this is Sphere. I did notice one strange thing about trying to get back to the original custom font, which is Nexus. It comes up always saying it's on Nexus, and if we select Nexus, it doesn't seem to change it. And the only way I found out of getting back to that original one is to go into the fonts once again, and instead of saying custom OSD, we can change it to something else, either like KISS or just turn it off altogether. And then if we go back to custom, the Nexus becomes active again, and it's all okay. So some weirdness there, but it seems to be working. So there you go, that's using fonts. Now, I did contact WalkSnail, like I said, and they did mention that I can't put on 4 fonts at once, so 3 seems to be a limit at the moment for some reason. They did say there's a bunch of bugs still in OSD that are improving, and I noticed on the Sneaky FPV site it talks about, even in the latest updates, it doesn't support custom fonts in iNav yet for some reason. So the only additional thing to remember, apart from the fact you can only put 3 fonts on, and for many people they just want the 1 font anyway. But the only other thing to remember is, after you get that font onto your goggles, don't forget to take a copy of it and put it in whatever directory you need, just in case you want to render some DVR out with that OSD display on there. So you'll need that font again. Also, if you found the fonts useful, don't forget that Sneaky FPV is doing this for nothing, but there's a nice button so you can buy them a coffee for $5 just to say thanks, which I'd certainly encourage, because these are really nice fonts to look at. So hopefully I'll be out flying those some more. I still have to test this out with Betaflight 442 or 4.5 just to see if it gets rid of the problem, but odds on I'm going to have to roll that back to 4.3 just so I'm confident in it flying and doing all the bits. But I'll be back with the next video soon. In the meantime, I hope that's been helpful. I'll catch you later. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.